Hey everyone, and a very warm welcome to This Explainer. Grab your notebooks and pens because today we are going to completely unpack a massive turning point in our history, the 1991 economic reforms in India. We're going to analyze these monumental shifts and build what we can call the ultimate balance sheet of the Indian economy. So this brings up a huge question that economists have been debating for 3 decades. Did the 1991 reforms actually fix the Indian economy? To figure that out, we can't just go off opinions. We need to be objective. That's why we're building this balance sheet today. We will look at the brilliant assets and the clear wins, but we're also going to strictly examine the liabilities. The specific areas where the economy really struggled. Here is exactly what we are covering today. First, the 1991 economic shift. Second, liberalization and privatization. Third, the big economic wins. Fourth, struggles in agriculture. Fifth, industry and disinvestment. And finally, the final verdict. Section 1. The 1991 Economic Shift. When we look back at over 30 years of sweeping policy changes, we absolutely have to look at the hard data. In economics, growth is usually measured by the gross domestic product, or GDP. But to truly understand what happened, we need to look past just the overall GDP and see what the individual sector data tells us about the real impact on the ground.
Section 2. Liberalization and privatization explained.
Before we get into the heavy numbers, here's a key pointer for your notes. You need absolute clarity on these core concepts. First up is liberalization. Think of this as finally unlocking the heavy doors of the Indian economy. For decades, we had really strict regulations. Liberalization meant reducing government restrictions and lowering tariffs. It was basically an open invitation to the rest of the world, allowing for much greater free trade and letting international competition into our local markets. Definitely write that down, because it's the foundation of everything that happened in 1991.
Next, we have privatization. If liberalization was unlocking the doors, privatization was literally changing who is sitting in the driver's seat. This is the transfer of ownership or business control from the government over to the private sector. The state essentially stepped back from running certain industries, letting private companies take over to boost market efficiency.
Section 3. The big economic wins.
All right, let's look at the asset side of our balance sheet. The immediate success story is honestly pretty incredible. Just look at this massive jump in GDP growth. Pre-reforms, from 1980 to 1991, growth was sitting at around 5.6%. But post-1991, India saw rapid, continual growth, eventually hitting a staggering 9.4% in 2021-22. Make a quick note here. This phenomenal growth was driven almost entirely by a massive boom in the service sector.
And it wasn't just GDP. The opening of the economy completely transformed our foreign reserves. Consider this number. Back in 1990-91, India's foreign exchange reserves were hovering at a critically low level, just about $6 billion. Fast forward to 2023-24, and those reserves have absolutely exploded to $646 billion. Today, India is actually one of the largest foreign exchange reserve holders in the entire world.
Right alongside those reserves, foreign investment absolutely skyrocketed. We're talking foreign direct investment and foreign institutional investment combined. In 1990, this was a mere $100 million, but by 2022-23, foreign money was pouring into the country to the tune of $23 billion. The global market clearly saw immense potential in an opened-up India.
On top of that, India transformed into a major global exporter. Here are a few important pointers for your notes. Auto parts, pharmaceutical goods, engineering goods, IT software, and textiles. Jot those down. India became a total powerhouse in these specific sectors on the world stage. And the best part? Alongside this massive export boom, the government actually managed to keep rising domestic prices under control.
Section 4. Struggles in agriculture.
But a true balance sheet has to list its liabilities too, right? While the service sector was booming, the reforms brought a fundamental and honestly quite dangerous shift for Indian agriculture. Because the new policies were so hyper-focused on exports, agricultural production completely shifted gears. Farmers moved away from growing everyday food grains for the domestic market and pivoted heavily toward cash crops meant for export. This sudden shift put massive pressure on local food grain prices.
The broader setbacks for agriculture were severe. Public investment in crucial infrastructure like irrigation, power, and market linkages, which were the literal backbone of the Green Revolution, actually dropped after 1991. Add to that the partial removal of fertilizer subsidies, which shot the cost of production way up.
Combine all this with low minimum support prices and a sudden wave of fierce international competition, and the result was devastating, especially for the small and marginal farmers of India.
Section 5. Industry and Disinvestment Challenges.
And it wasn't just agriculture feeling the heat. While our IT and service sectors were soaring globally, local manufacturing ran into a brick wall. Let's walk through this chain reaction, which we can call the industrial squeeze. First, import tariffs were slashed. Second, because of that, cheaper foreign goods flooded the Indian market. Third, these cheaper imports rapidly replaced the demand for our own domestic goods. And fourth, because domestic manufacturing slowed down, job creation completely stagnated. To make matters even worse, Indian exports still faced high barriers in developed countries like the USA, proving that free trade wasn't exactly a two-way street.
Now, let's talk about privatization through the lens of disinvestment. Every year, the government sets targets for selling off public sector enterprises. Let's look at the figures. In 1991-92, the target was to mobilize 2,500 crore rupees, but they actually brought in 30-40 crore. By 2022-23, they mobilized a massive 46,000 crore rupees. On paper, looks like a huge revenue win, but critics strongly argue that these public assets were severely undervalued and just sold off cheaply to private companies, meaning a huge loss for the government in the long run. Critics also point out that these massive funds weren't really used to build up social infrastructure like schools or hospitals. Instead, they were mostly used just to plug holes in government revenue shortages. So I want to pause here and ask you to really think about this. Do you think selling off government properties is truly the best way to improve their efficiency? It's a fantastic debate topic for your classes.
Section 6. Globalization, the final verdict.
So, how do we sum up the fiscal impact of 3 decades of these sweeping changes? Here is the stark fiscal reality for your notes. The reforms placed strict limits on how much the government could spend, especially in social sectors. Tax cuts, which were supposed to stop tax evasion and boost total revenue, honestly just failed to do so. Lower tariffs meant lost custom duties, and the tax incentives given to attract foreign investors drained potential revenue even further. Ultimately, this severely restricted the government's ability to fund crucial welfare and development projects.
In the end, our balance sheet shows a distinctly dual nature to these reforms. On the asset side, we have incredible global opportunities, unprecedented access to world markets, an influx of high tech, and the chance to become a major international player. But right beside it, on the liability side, we have harsh local vulnerabilities, severe threats to domestic industries, painful job stagnation, and immense, crushing pressure on our agricultural backbone.
Which leaves us with one final powerful question to wrap up this explainer. Is globalization the ultimate opportunity for developing nations or a fundamental threat to local survival? The 1991 economic reforms undeniably transformed India forever, bringing tremendous wealth to some sectors while leaving others fighting to survive. I want you to debate this in your classrooms. Thank you so much for joining me today, students. Keep asking questions, keep studying the data, and I'll see you in the next one.